Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be going through my 10 favourite compilation albums. By compilation albums I mean an album that has lots of different bands on, lots of different artists on, sometimes linked to a record label, sometimes linked to a genre. These albums were very important to me coming up as a young music listener. Without the internet, how was I going to find out about new music? When I discovered heavy metal in 1980, I found that the radio never seemed to feature any of those bands. I had to go and buy magazines, go down the library and get books on the history of rock and roll. And having limited resources and compilation albums often being a little bit cheaper than a proper album, I would go for these albums to try and find out what new artists, to me, sounded like. A lot of these artists had been big 10 years before that period when I was looking, so that also created a problem. The generation that was a little bit older than me, they knew all these bands, but I was coming up in the 80s. All my friends were listening to Duran Duran and Culture Club, and so compilations albums became very, very important. Now, originally I was going to do the best compilation albums of all time, but I realized as I was going through that this creates a list which is far more biographical. Now, why would anybody want to be interested in my biography? There's no reason whatsoever, but I think people of a similar age with a similar liking of the music that we cover on this channel may find it interesting to see how my journey into music mirrors theirs. I think it's very interesting when we start to get into this. Now, of course, as I said, these albums are a little bit cheaper. You could often pick them up for $2.99 back in the early 80s, as opposed to around about 5 albums. It was nearly half the price. And the reason for that is because these weren't proper albums, were they? And that's the thing. I've never spoken about them on this channel. And some of these albums are the most important albums to me. And certain bands that I love, my favourite tracks are the tracks that I discovered on these albums. So, shall we start off? This is an album that I inherited from my dad. And it was one of the very first albums I used to listen to a lot, and I absolutely loved it. I have spoken about this on the channel before, and when I held this up, it was interesting that the artist behind this, because this is actually a single artist who is doing his version of all these different tunes. When I brought this guy up, it seemed to resonate with a lot of progressive rock fans. Now, the album is this one here, Big War Movie Themes, okay, by Jeff Love and his orchestra. In the early 70s, we had this label FMP, and they brought out quite cheap albums. Often when you bought a hi-fi, you might be given one of these albums as a sort of tester, you know, and these compilation albums I've got hundreds of. This one I used to listen to over and over again. And being a bit nerdy, I also liked making Airfix model aeroplanes. And one of my favourite things to do when I was very little was to take my Lancaster bomber that I'd built, put this album on and put the Dam Busters theme on, there it is, and I would fly this model airplane around the living room listening to this. That was a very early experience of music. Was mine. My dad had brought me up listening to all these jazz records, but this was my thing. This was my album. Now, what's interesting here is theme tunes, right? Theme tunes seem to be of great interest to young progressive rock fans. Of course, theme tunes contain all the aspects of progressive rock without all the critical hate. You know, nobody will balk at appreciating some cop show theme or maybe some incredible orchestrated theme for some British TV show. And often these combined an orchestra with a band. There was electric guitars and drums, but also full orchestra, and they were really written. And they delivered a punch. This album contains the theme to a number of British war movie themes, including the Colonel Bogey theme from Bridge Over the River Kwai, the incredible David Lean film, came out in the late, about 1956, I think. And then we have a theme from another David Lean film, Lawrence of Arabia. Now, I absolutely love that tune. And the sound that, because this is written by Maurice Jarre, who was, of course, Jean-Michel Jarre's father. And the theme to Lawrence of Arabia seems to encompass a certain sound. Now, this was a very Western idealization of a sort of Arabic or North African sound, but I love that sound, and to this day I go back to that sound all the time. We've got Guns of Navarone, which was written by Dimitri Topkin. The Battle of Britain, which was written by what was his name? Goodwin, Ron Goodwin, a great British composer. Now his 633 Squadron, it also appears on here, also appeared on the Cozy Pal album Octopus, with Cozy Pal putting drums to it. This was incredible for me as a young guy. Where Eagles There, fantastic. Again, Ron Goodwin. We've got a lot of Ron Goodwin on here. We got the Green Berets theme from Nicholas Rosa. And the other composers I don't know so much. And of course, the aforementioned classic Dam Busters theme. A very, very important album to me. I will stick that there on top of Kate so you can still appreciate it. So as I move on to another album from around about the same period that I absolutely loved. And it was this. Top BBC TV themes, right? So this is going to be a trip down memory lane to anyone of a certain age. This came out around about 1978, and it was a compilation album of the sort of top BBC themes. I mean, it says it, doesn't it? You know, we've got all the pictures. It's all wonderful, right? There's some fantastic stuff here. We've got Who Plays the Ferryman, written by Yanis Markolopoulos. We have got Washington Behind Closed Doors, very, very, you know, I used to like that sort of strong sound. But number 3, Gangsters. And Gangsters was recorded by Chris Farlow and Dave Greenslade. Chris Farlow, of course, had sung in John Heisman's, not Tempest, the other one, Colosseum. So this wasn't progressive rock, but it was created by progressive rock people, so they could see the sort of British progressive rock scene in the late 70s move towards making TV themes. Of course they did. We've got the theme from Wings. Of course, we've got the great Stone Fox Chase by Area Code 615, which is, of course, the classic theme to the Old Grey Whistle Test. We've got, what's that? Doana de Jaleh, which is a Romanian tune. So you get all these colours from different countries. Hong Kong Beat. Don't know who else done that. The Water Margin. Anyone remember the Water Margin? That's it was like this never-ending TV show. I think it was dubbed from Japanese into English, or Chinese into English anyway. Sailing. The Duchess of Duke Street. When I was a kid, I loved the Duchess. So I can't stay on these because I'm having a trip down memory lane. Of course, we've got Last of Summer Wine. Angels, which was written by Alan Parker. Kenny Ballcrop's on here. It's so eclectic. I loved eclectic. I don't know if it's because I had a bit of the old ADHD. I'm pretty sure I did when I was young. And so music that changed, that rapidly went from one place to the next, which is something all my friends seem to hate. I seem to love it. And as we see Frank Zappa cropping his head up here in the background, it is precisely what Frank Zappa did. So these two albums are very, very important to me. Because in 1980 I discovered heavy metal, and I started to get into all sorts of different bands. Now, there are two albums that I'm going to deal with together as one choice, which were so important to me. Absolutely important. And these albums I lived by. They were, of course, Axe Attack, which I think came out in 1980. And the following year, Axe Attack Volume 2. I basically bought this album and then went and bought albums by everybody on this album, which included Rainbow, and they're here with All Night Long, which had been a huge hit. And that was a song that came out, I think, in 1980, around about February, I believe, and was a catalyst to me suddenly getting a real interest in heavy metal, as it was called back then, whether we would class All Night Long as heavy metal now. We've got Running White-Faced City Boy by Ian Gillan, which I absolutely loved. I became a huge fan of Ian Gillan. Breaking the Law by Judas Priest. And I then went out and bought Sin After Sin, which I was very lucky to buy that one because it had Simon Phillips on drums, and I love the drumming on that. We've got Ted Nugent with Cat Scratch Fever. I used to love it. Now we can't really talk about Ted Nugent because he's right wing. Make It Real by the Scorpions. I never was a Scorpions fan, but that is a superb song. And what you get on this is, actually looking back on it, fantastic songs. Race with the Devil, which is a cover version by Girls' School. And then, of course, Doctor Doctor by UFO. And that's a live version, so it must have come from Strangers in the Night, which I went out and bought and loved. Side 2 opens up with AC/DC Highway to Hell. Essential, bought that album. White Snake, Reading and Willing, bought that album. Iron Maiden, Running Free, which is from the first Iron Maiden album. Classic new wave of British heavy metal, bought that album. Aerosmith, Sweet Emotion, still my favourite Aerosmith track to this day. And then somebody that I've never mentioned on the channel and people have asked me to mention, and that is Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush. And on here we got You Got Living. Now, I agree with you. I never got a Mahogany Rush album. I never saw one. But they did have, it might have been a concert on the radio. Anyway, I ended up with this cassette tape full of Frank Marino. What was astonishing about Frank Marino at the time is that in 1980, there was suddenly this move towards fast guitar playing. But the guitarists hadn't emerged yet. You know, the Yngwie Malmsteens had not emerged at that point. So we were searching around and we all wanted to hear faster, faster, faster. The new wave of British heavy metal bands didn't really have the virtuosity. You know, we had people like Dave Murray doing their best. But looking around, there was some incredible guitarists. There was Eddie Van Halen, who I hadn't discovered at this point, Uli John Roth, Michael Schenker. But Frank Marino was sort of your standard rock blues guitarist, but was pretty pokey. And he was one of my favourite guitarists at the time. And then we finish out with Black Sabbath, Paranoid and Motorhead Bomber. I went out and bought Paranoid because of this album. And I'd already got Ace of Spades when I got that. Was the very first album for me. This is a classic album. Of course, when the follow-up to this came out, I went and bought it straight away. On here we've got Since You've Been Gone by Rainbow, which is almost like a pop song now, but that was included on an album that had that cover. How times have changed. Motorhead, Ace of Spades, which had been a hit record before. Black Sabbath, Die Young, you know, Off Heaven and Hell. Fantastic stuff. Samson, Earth Mother, which featured Bruce Dickinson on vocals. I was a fan of Samson. I loved his guitar playing. And they had a drummer called Thundersticks who wore a mask, and I thought that was very impressive. We've got Michael Schenker, Armed and Ready. I had to sneak that into a video the other day because I absolutely love the Michael Schenker group, and that tune's fantastic. And here we have Rush, The Trees, the mini epic. That was my favourite track. This could well be the point in 1981 where I start searching out prog. Because of that, I went out and bought Moving Pictures. We got Scorpions, The Zoo, which is a great chuggy rock track. Turn It Over, we got Ain't No Love in the Heart of the City, which is taken from Live in the Heart of the City. I bought that album. And this here, when I was at school, our RE teacher allowed us to bring in some records from home. I brought this album and I played, because I didn't want to upset my friends with something like Flesh and Blood by Ted Nugent. I played Ain't No Love in the Heart of the City, which I was quite proud of. And I think the RE teacher, who was obviously a Christian, liked the sentiment of this tune, which is lucky because I had no idea what the sentiment of this tune was about. And if I'd have put Ready and Willing on, it might have gone down in a different way. Murders in the Rue Morgue by Iron Maiden, classic. Rock Brigade by Def Leppard. The amount of people who have wanted me to slate Def Leppard, I won't do it. Because On Through the Night is incredible, High and Dry, incredible, and even Pyromania is incredible. I love those, and then they go crap then. Flesh and Blood, as I said, by Ted Nugent. Mutually Assured Destruction by Gillan, which would have been a big hit at that year. And then Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult. All right, what an incredible track. I missed out on Blue Oyster Cult, and I heard that and loved it way back then. Then we've got Mystery Train by UFO. That's the second UFO after Schenker left. And then it finishes up with United by Judas Priest. Now, United had been on the Top of the Pops when I was a kid. I'd seen them stood there with their studs and leather, and I was very impressed. So these two albums are like, they're like, I don't know what I do with that. I don't think my laptop, I've got these propped up against the laptop. I support it. Right. I'm now really interested in music. The radio, because my mum would get up in the morning, we'd get ready for school, and we'd listen to Terry Wogan. And as much as I love Terry Wogan, he never featured anything like Iron Maiden on there. So I'm going searching, and I start to search through my dad's record collection. And of course, with my sort of ADHD view of life, right, where I like lots of different things, I was drawn to his compilation albums as well. And I think this desire to hear the eclecticness was also a precursor to me ending up loving progressive rock. But my dad had no progressive rock compilation albums in his collection, but he did have some jazz. And these are the albums that really got me into jazz. This one here had come out in the 70s, 25 years of Atlantic Records. There we go. The Ertgen brothers, Armand Ertgen, had been very important in supporting jazz and blues and soul, and then eventually supporting bands like Yes and Led Zeppelin. I had no idea about that, but what we have here is a number of classic jazz and blues artists. We got Big Joe Turner. It opens up with TV Mama, which I absolutely love. It's got Elmore James on guitar, so straight away I'm hearing that classic, you know, from the age of 12, you know, I had this on constant play. And then we got Shake It and Break It by Billy and Dee Dee Pierce. I have no recollection of that, so I obviously didn't listen to that one. Then King Curtis and Champion Jack Dupree. That was pretty good. Didn't really listen to that one much. But then we had the 8-minute Compared to What by Les McCann and Eddie Harris from Swiss Movement, the live album. This is proto jazz rock fusion. So you can see where I'm picking it up. I love that. That on side one of this was the classic track. After that, we had Ray Bryant do a solo piano piece, 3 minutes long, called After Hours, which came from the album Alone at Montreux. Great. I did listen to that one quite a bit. Turn it over, and now we have some incredible stuff. First track, Charlie Mingus, Oh Lord, Don't Let Them Drop That Atomic Bomb on Me, from the album Oh Yeah. I never got that at all. I never knew what was going on there. I was too young, and that gave me a dislike of Charlie Mingus, and I never bought a Charlie Mingus album. I missed out. A few years later, I bit the bullet, and I bought Tijuana Moods, which I really liked, but again, I don't think that was the right one for me to get. The album that this is off, Oh Yeah, is an absolute classic album that I missed out on, and that's why I don't mention Mingus that much. But around about this time, they had a week on BBC Two of jazz and blues documentaries, and they showed Miles Davis playing on some TV show in 1958, the classic one where he does So What, and then he performs with the Gil Evans Orchestra. And on there was John Coltrane. I actually literally fell off my seat when I saw John Coltrane. So I ain't got a John Coltrane album, so I pull this album out, and lo and behold, John Coltrane's on it. But not only is Coltrane on it, he's playing Giant Steps. I've been listening to Giant Steps for around about 44 years now. That was the track on here. I was fascinated by it. After that, we get some Dave Brubeck playing at Take 5. Always a massive Brubeck fan, but this is later, and it's got Jerry Mulligan on saxophone, Alan Dawson on drums, from the album Last Set at Newport. It's followed up with The Sheriff by Modern Jazz Quartet. My dad was a huge Modern Jazz Quartet. I've listened to that since the year dot. And then it finishes up with Herbie Mann playing a tune called New Orleans. Now that is funky jazz rock. This, in the same way that Stack 2 gave me the prog, this gave me the bug for fusion. It was an essential record. I was playing the drums at the time, and my dad had also this one in his collection, King of Drums. Does anybody remember this label, I Love Jazz? Right, this was dirt cheap with its horrible graphics, but in our local record shop they had a ton of these, including albums by Miles Davis. And this one, I can remember my dad getting. This wasn't one that he bought in the 70s. I can remember him going out and getting this because my dad had been a jazz drummer. And on here, we had drummers like Gene Krupa with the Benny Goodman Orchestra, Lionel Hampton with his own orchestra. It had Louis Belson with the Duke Ellington Orchestra, Art Blakey with Jazz Messengers, Max Roach with Slide Hampton, Sam Woodyard with the Duke Ellington Orchestra, Joe Morello with Dave Brubeck Quartet, and Sam Woodyard and Jimmy Johnson with the Duke Ellington Orchestra. Each of these tracks contained a drum solo. I learnt to drum listening to this, especially Joe Morello and Sam Woodyard. They were the ones that blew me away. Samuel Woodyard does not get mentioned. There they all are. Look at all those fantastic drummers there. Brilliant. Right, so I will put that here because I forgot to put the other ones up there, didn't I? In the mid-80s, the Blue Note label, who I had no idea about, they reformed around about 1985. And to celebrate this, they held a concert that contained a whole bunch of classic Blue Note artists, which I videotaped. On there was people like Art Blakey with the Jazz Messengers. You've got some avant-garde jazz with Benny Wallace, with Jack DeJohnette drumming. But most important for me, it had footage of the classic Miles Davis quintet, but with Freddie Hubbard replacing it, so it was really like almost like the Maiden Voyage band with Herbie Hancock, which featured Herbie, Freddie Hubbard, Ron Carter, Tony Williams. That changed my life. And my dad seen the interest in that, went out and bought a couple of compilations after. And look at this, is what I'm talking about. Look at that. Expect to pay no more than $1.99. That's how much this cost. The 50th anniversary of Blue Note, the finest in jazz, 1939 to 1989. Now, what you get on here is, on side one, is all the new artists they signed, which included Diane Reeves, great jazz singer. It's got George Duke on keyboards there. I can see it all. Ricky Lawson on drums, bit of fusion. We got the big deal that Brûlé Legrand had in the mid-80s with Dennis Chambers on drums off his album Foreign Affairs. A great slice of fusion, and that album didn't do much for Borelli, who was not, I think, got the his just desserts. And when I did my underrated guitarists, so underrated that I forgot about him. Tommy Smith, who was a part of that British jazz boom in the mid-80s. We've got Stanley Jordan with Eleanor Rigby off the album Magic Touch. And we've got Bobby McFerrin, Thinking About Your Body, which was that vocal thing he does that was then on an advert for chocolate. So that's what we got on. But side two, Albert Ammons and Meade Lux Lewis from 1939. That I think is the first recording ever signed to Blue Note Records, and it's a recording of stride piano, a fantastic. Then we get Miles Davis with the track Donna of Miles Davis Volume 1. We've got Bud Powell. Right, I'd never heard of Bud Powell, off an absolute classic album, The Amazing Bud Powell Volume 2. Lou Donaldson, a little slice of proto-acid jazz there with Alligator Boogaloo. And then it finishes with a song of my father with Horace Silver. Absolutely classic stuff. I will stick that there for you to look at. But I think for 99p, we also managed to pick up this very strange album. And I'd class this as one. Right, because this isn't really an album. This is half an album. How can it be half an album? On here, even better stuff. Hank Mobley, My Groove, Your Move, off the album Roll Call. Art Blake and the Jazz Messengers, United, off Roots and Herbs. John Coltrane, I'm Old Fashioned, off Blue Train. Jerry Mulligan and Lee Konetz's Crazy Day, off the album Revelation. Herbie Hancock, Eye of the Hurricane, off Maiden Voyage. And Jean-Luc Ponty, American and Drinks and Goes Home, from the album Cantaloupe Island. All right, that's a Zappa tune. Okay, now I'm pretty sure that that is on King Kong, but I'm not so sure. Did he do it on Cantaloupe Island? I'm not sure. We'd have to find this out. But anyway, that 2 minutes of American Drinks and Go Home, that was mind-blowing to me. Now I'm going to show you something interesting about this album. You can see there's side one, standard album. Side two, a silent, empty groove. Why? It's the only album that I've got that's got that. Now, they could have done this a lot, but it's quite a neat idea, isn't it, to have that? Of course, I played it. You could play it, and you just got some, like, subtle crackle. Right, so, I got into buying these jazz compilations. There was a lot in our local record shop. And one day I ventured out and got this thing, a double album, really cheap. I think this was $3.99. Jazz Giants, look at it. And we get a nice little essay in the middle with a lovely saxophone, a clarinet and a trumpet. And it tells us all about Louis Armstrong. This is where I got to know about my jazz history. Duke Ellington, Johnny Hodges, all great stuff. I bought that, I thought I'd get... Now, what is actually on here? Well, I bought it, I was very excited because the compilation album, but it got Chick Corea on it. And I like Chick Corea. By this time I'd heard, Return to Forever. I like Chick Corea, but what I was faced with here was earlier recording of Chick Corea. Which album would it be off? It's an late 60s, early 70s album. And I think the lineup's wrong because it says it has Horace Arnold on drums, and I think it's Jack DeJohnette. This is orchestrated free jazz. This is avant-garde jazz. On the other record too, we've got Don Cherry playing 2 tunes with Gateau Barbier, Carl Berger on vibraphone, and then that's followed up by Ghosts by Albert Ayler. First time I heard some proper free jazz was Ghosts by Albert Ayler with the incredible Sonny Murray on drums. And then when you turned it over, it had a 26-minute version of If Only We Knew by John Handy. Now, I think that comes from the famous live album. And I've said that this before was an early fusion album. Not so much in the grooves, but just the way that John Handy was playing alto sax. It's also got Michael Sampson on violin. This is really important album to me. I didn't know what I'd got. This was the avant-garde, and it opened me up to avant-garde jazz. Shall we put that there? Awful graphics, very misleading, but that's what we got. Now look at this one. This album didn't get me into fusion, but it was very important. Look at the state of that. Rock and Jazz, a Fusion, 99p, right? This is incredible. And what do we get on here, on this awful looking album? We've got Eddie Harris, Is It In, right? From the album Is It In, a dubious title if I've ever heard one, a slice of very funky jazz fusion. Then we get Jan Hammer and Jerry Goodman with Topeka off their Like Children album. Classic stuff. I heard that before I heard Like Children. I was a Mavish Nuksh fan at the time, but that was exciting. And then it's followed up with Infinite Search by Miroslav Vitous, which is this sort of early weather reporting sounding track. And look at the lineup on here. Joe Henderson on tenor saxophone, John McLaughlin on guitar, Herbie Hancock on electric piano, and Jack DeJohnette drums, produced by Herbie Mann. Absolutely incredible stuff here. Then we get, and it's a shame, they have 1 minute of the live suites by Stanley Clarke off the album Stanley Clarke, one of the greatest jazz rock albums of all time. And then that's followed up by Passport. Now, a number of people have asked me about Passport. I was obsessed with Passport because of this track here, which is Homunculus, which is, what does it say what album we're on? No. From Cross Collateral. I love this. It sounded like a sort of European weather report to me with a bit more poke. Very well played, very exciting. Never found a Passport album. Never got into them just because I could not find an album by them. Turn it over, we've got an edit of Stratus by Billy Cobham. Then we've got Do It Again, which is obviously a Steely Dan tune, but it's been covered by the great Herbie Mann. Now, Herbie Mann, I mainly cover here because of the awfulness of his album covers, but he did do some funky fusion of varying degrees of quality in the 70s. Then we get In a Silent Way by Joe Zawinul off the album Zawinul. And then we finish up with Inner Space by Chick Corea off the album Inner Space, another one of those early Chick Corea albums when he's exploring orchestrated free jazz. This was very important for 99p. How can you go wrong? How can you go wrong? I've discussed this before, by the time I got to the mid-80s, I'd become a bit of a jazz snob, and I was only listening to acoustic jazz. I wasn't even listening to jazz fusion, and I was sat there listening to probably, I don't know, maybe Keith Jarrett one night, something very intellectual, and next door my brother was listening to Public Enemy, and I thought it was awful. And then I realised that I was listening to all this avant-garde jazz, and I was just being prejudiced against this Public Enemy. I remember thinking, now there's something going on here. So I went out and managed to buy this. Now this is a promotional copy, as you see here, for promotion only, not for sale. It was a Def Jam sample, which I think was banged out for like DJs perhaps. On here we've got Oran Juice Jones with Here I Go Again, Chuck Stanley with Day by Day, Tashan with Chasing a Dream. We then get Oran Juice Jones again with The Rain. Let's flip it over and we got the Beastie Boys Fight for Your Right to Party. Then we've got Time Bomb, and that was my favourite track on this, off the first Public Enemy album, Yo Bum Rush the Show, which is so live. It just sounds like it's done live in the room with a turntablist and then just rapping over the top. And then after that we've got LL Cool J with I Need a Beat, an original concept. Ends the album with Bite My Stylie. This is where hip hop grew up. This is classic hip hop, and this is the album that got me into hip hop. Def Jam sampler. Put it there. Look at that. And I'm hoping that some people will say, "Oh my God, have you got that, Andy? That's worth so much money." And I think I've come to the last album on my list. I think I've done 10. All right. Now this isn't strictly, but it is a compilation album because it's got loads of different artists on. But it's actually a recording from a live music festival that was called the Marty Soul Festival. There we go. This took a lot of tracking down for me. On here we've got the Allman Brothers, Long John Baldry, Cactus, Dr. John, Jonathan Edwards. We've got Emerson, Lake and Palmer there, fantastic. Jay Giles Band, B.B. King and Herbie Mann again, doing some stuff. Osabisa, great, you know, sort of Afro funkiness. But as you can see, the Marvin Schnorkstra with John McLaughlin. Right, I knew that they played that festival, and when I saw this album in a shop, second-hand shop, and it was very expensive, I had to fork out around about 20 quid because they'd included the Marvin Schnorkstra on here. And what we get, I'm actually going to go in and open it up now. There's a great shot inside. This is a pretty rare album, I think. Where would it be? Yeah, on side one we get the Jay Giles Band. This is a lineup. Jay Giles Band, they come out and do Looking for Love, and then Dr. John ends that side with Wang Dang Doodle. But in between that is 13 minutes, sorry, of the Mahavishnu Orchestra playing the Noonwood Race, one of those fiercest tracks. I've got to show you the actual thing. I know this sounds mad, but I've got to show you the actual record because this is what we're talking about. Here we go. All right. Look, can you see in the middle there? A great big huge slab of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Now for me, I think that track there is the greatest moment of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Recorded in 1972, where they're at their peak, where the band cohesion is almost like psychic. Before they started to fall into, you know, a little bit of showboating and maybe too many solo spots. You know, not criticising it. It's impeccably recorded, and the band is just playing at 1 billion miles an hour. If you want to understand the Mahavishnu Orchestra, you've got to hear them live. And the only real proper recording, I think, is that. Now, this is now on the remastered version of The Inner Mountain Flame. But I feel that's the greatest recording by the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It's them live and it's recorded beautifully. But it hasn't been, you know, there's no echo on it because it's outside, so it's tight, you can hear everything. And that became my favourite moment by the Mahavishnu Orchestra, a brutal example of them playing live. When they brought out the remastered version of Between Nothing and Its Eternity, in the box set you get a second disc of Mahavishnu Orchestra playing Mahavishnu Orchestra tunes, recorded on the same gig. It's right at the end of their run. It's absolutely fantastic, but it does document the Mahavishnu Orchestra in the period of collapse. They've recently just brought an album which I haven't heard yet, and I really want to review it on the channel. I know it's come out on vinyl because I've seen a picture of John McLaughlin holding it, and it's called Live at Cleveland. I want to check that out. I've listened to it on the net, and there's bootlegs many a time. I don't know if it's the same thing. That's a great album as well. Anyway, that has been my 10 favourite compilation albums. I hope you enjoyed this. I am now going to film my favourite best of albums, right? So I'm looking forward to that as well. If you liked this, and this is classic Andy now, no computer graphics, albums in my hand, done live, no editing. If you like this sort of thing, then stick a like on the video, please. That would really help the algorithm, and we need to help that algorithm. It's like a little old lady trying to cross the road, and you can feel better by just clicking it and helping that little algorithm across the road to bring more people to me, because that little old lady is coming to see me, you see. Well, it's probably a little old man, actually. Then if you want to subscribe to see some more stuff, I have upped my output. I'm doing nearly a video a day. So for those of you who want to know how it works, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, full-on music videos where I talk about prog, jazz, and all that type of stuff. On Sunday, I tend to do something a little bit more esoteric and philosophical. And then on Tuesday and Thursday now are my wild cards, and I can do anything at those points. If you don't want to only interested in music, don't check out a Tuesday or a Thursday video. But if you do want to see, I'll do whatever I want, and I'm going to push that further out now. I'm going to start talking about all sorts of things, because there's so much I want to talk about on this channel. If you want to support me, you can become a patron, and the link is down below. You can become a free member, or you can become a paid up member, and you'll get stuff regardless. Obviously, the paid up members get a lot more. And if you want to support me in what I'm doing, then I would really appreciate that, because I have now gone pro, and this is what I'm doing for a living, which is why I'm trying to do videos every day, and it's working. I'm doing okay, but part of that is coming from my tip jar. I am now a digital visual busker, and that's how I make my living. Thank you very much. I will see you on the next video.